Generational trauma is a human genetic explanation for when a person has, really strong emotional dysregulation, maybe multiple mental health issues, behavioral issues, maybe addictions. Basically, you feel mentally and emotionally out of control, and you've always felt this pretty much all your life. When I say out of control, I mean like you're doing some severe compulsive behaviors that are getting you in trouble or just making you depressed or making your life not move forward. And you feel like you've always done this. So generational trauma states that any kind of unresolved trauma that your loved one, that your parents had, or their parents had, or their parents had, especially as children, and they actually went through some kind of physiological trauma in which they were abused physically, emotionally, even sexually, if they went through wartime, if they went through a depression era mentality, if they just lived in a very tense, abusive way that caused them to be traumatized as children, but they couldn't express it and they had to push it down. You know, uh, Generational trauma states that, and this is a real biological fact, this is not a theory, that it gets passed to your children through your genetic material. And so it has been shown that when that happens, that person, when they become reproductive age, now are more risk for having children that have severe severe mental health issues, conditions that have emotional dysregulation as a main feature, like ADHD, autism, PTSD, bipolar, schizophrenia, things like that, borderline personality disorder. And so it has been already shown and taught on the university level that generational trauma contributes to a person being born with this. And generational trauma states that, you can only push it down from generation to generation so much. I mean, let's face it, we really don't teach children how to deal with difficult traumatic emotions very well, especially in our generation. So it gets pushed down from generation to generation until it ends up in a person like me, where I have multiple mental health diagnoses with emotional dysregulation as a key feature, ADHD, autism, PTSD, mild borderline personality disorder, multiple addictions throughout my life, and strong impulsive behavior control and stuff like that. And so that's what generational trauma is. Okay, so I've been doing a series on this on TikTok. Maybe you've seen it. It's probably the video that got the most views of anything that I've done so far, the large 8.5 minute one that I did. So I've been doing this series on breaking the cycle and what to do to break the cycle. And so there's 5 parts to the video. The 5 parts of these videos on TikTok. The first part is, if you feel that you are an inheritor of generational trauma, do the research, prioritize your mental health, stabilize in your mental health, your emotions and stuff like that. But you have to really make it like the number one priority in your life. I would say even over your career. Because if you don't prioritize something like this and you have multiple mental health issues, emotional dysregulation and behavior impulse control, you will lose not just jobs. I lost 2 careers and a marriage before I realized what was going on. And you know, I mean, you can't take back the past. Things happen for a reason, but I didn't know. So I didn't know to prioritize this until now. But I'm prioritizing it now. Second thing is do your best to maintain a stable living, some kind of income stability. Think outside the box if necessary, because we have hard problems in terms of like maintaining stable income. We're in and out of jobs. We're either underemployed or unemployed. You know, over 50% of us get divorced. Like if the divorce rate is like 60% of this country, ours is like 80 and stuff because we're so emotionally dysregulated. So it's really hard to maintain a stable living for us, but you have to try to do it because you're handling all this generational trauma inside of you. So, maybe you may need to be paired with somebody who's much more functional in society and is able to maintain a job than you. A lot of times, people like us, we're failure to launch. We need financial help all of our lives, and maybe oh, who did that? Um, and maybe sometimes, we need financial help or we're living in our parents' basements or something like that. It's hard to live with this condition. And so, but it's much harder to deal with it if you're homeless and, you're destitute and you're like, you don't have regular income. So just do your best to stabilize on your living situation as much as possible. Now, if you've decided to do this by living with somebody who's more functional than you, like a parent or a partner, you have to give them a break and take care of yourself. In the end, you are responsible for your own emotional stability and your own behaviors. You cannot use, I have generational trauma because I saw this thing on this TikTok video. This guy said multiple mental health issues, addictions, and I'm just doing this because I'm generational trauma. You cannot use that as an excuse. I tried, and my ex, who's now my ex, after a marriage of 25 years, left. And so you cannot use this as an excuse. So as you're dealing with this, notify people, tell people what's going on with you as much as possible, but you have to take responsibility for yourself. Prioritize your mental health and your emotional stability for your sake and for the sake of anybody who's helping you with this. Okay. And so, and then the next thing on that TikTok video series about generational trauma was get support from people who are like you, who think like you, who have similar what I call personality profiles. Maybe they have the same mental health diagnoses, ADHD, autism. They're finding that ADHD and autism together is like a whole new personality profile, which is what I have, which is what I am. And they're calling it ADHD. It's like a little fangled term, but it is different. Being just ADHD or being just autistic is not the same thing as putting the two together. And they are finding out that, whole new studies and personality profiles need to be done. They're only been doing it in the last 5 or 6 years and stuff. So what I'm saying is when I finally became friends with and formed a support group toward myself of people who had similar mental health diagnoses and they thought like me, they processed information like me, they processed their emotions like me. That was a revelation to me, um, because I never really paid attention to it. So when I was actually interacting with them, there was a strong sense of camaraderie, there was a strong sense of belonging, there was a strong sense of us supporting each other. So get support from people like yourself. And this is also important to me. Don't just get support from people who have these mental health conditions. Get support from people who have these things and you're dealing with generational trauma, but they're trying to get better. They're not just, going out there and using every night or just, blaming everybody or something like that. All the people in my support group, they're all working towards some kind of mental health and behavioral health recovery, usually in the same ways through, understanding their mental health, through spirituality, through meditation, things like that. So that's the third thing. And so I want to talk about the fourth thing, which is, and I'm going to do the meditation on this, when all else fails, meaning if you do all the suggestions that I just said, and the quality of your mind is still not able to give you consistent, harmonious, and functional thoughts because of the mental health, and you're beginning to lose hope, you know, um, the next thing to do is go spiritual. What does that mean? What that means is do your best to pursue and know the full reality of who you are. Because one of the reasons we get depressed over this is that this is a generational trauma resolving body, mind, this right here. But this is not, in the end, who I really am. Remember, maybe you've heard this term before. We are not humans having a spiritual experience. We are spirit having a human experience. That's the reality of it. And so if you continue to identify who you are with this body that's dysregulated and has impulsive behavior controls and relapses and does its best, but the mental health gets the better of it. You lose jobs, you lose friendships, you lose important relationships, you lose family members who don't want to talk to you anymore. You can get really, really depressed and start to lose hope, like I did, until I took it upon myself through, certain kinds of meditations. And I believe that honestly, that God saved me, led me on this path towards knowing who I really was, which is honestly, in the end, who you really are is your spiritual connection to God, if you want to call it that. There's many terms for it. I'm just trying to use terms that people understand. I also call it the peaceful presence of universal energy. I call it source energy. You can call it broomstick. It doesn't really matter. If you get really hung up on the words, then your mind has been conditioned to certain things, and I had to break free of that myself. So I'll use things like God, but I'm not Christian, So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that. I'm going to be swapping terms in and out and in and out when I talk about this, but know beyond a shadow of a doubt that what you are is spirit having a human experience. Okay, so I'm going to do a meditation on this to help you all to really see that you are basically spiritual energy. And spiritual to me just means, you know, we haven't been able to pick it up. There are things in our world, in our reality, that our five senses and our scientific instruments that we've created, as complex as we think they are, there's things in this reality that we just can't measure, we just can't see. That's what spiritual means to me. There are forms of energy that we just can't pick up. Everything is made up of energy, but there are forms of it we just can't pick up. That's what spiritual means to me. So I just want you to know that too. So, I mean, I was raised Christian, but I'm not Christian and stuff, but I can talk in that vernacular if I need to when I help people. So what happened here, though, I want to talk a little bit about how I made the switch, how it actually happened. It was a really, really simple thing. So I was interacting with spiritual teachers, meditating a lot. I had a lot of spiritual experiences in which this, I guess, the bliss of meditation, the bliss of spiritual awakening was realized to be the energy of the universe or God or whatever you want to call it. And I did realize, like, God is that which is appearing as all of this. But there was still a very strong separation here. And I kept on thinking that I was separate than the spirituality that I was seeing out here until I was listening to a video by a spiritual teacher. I'll give his name. His name is Jim Newman. He's a non-duality teacher. And somebody was talking to him and they were complaining and they were saying, well, what about my ego? Because everybody thinks that the ego is the bad guy, ego is the problem, ego is your thinking. We got to get rid of the ego. So he asked Jim Newman, what about the ego? And Jim Newman just sort of said really simply, there is no ego, man. Everything is God. And I had heard that like 150 times over my 12-year spiritual path and meditation and spiritual teachings. And for some reason, that particular video at that particular time clicked. And I cannot say that it was some kind of such an energetic bliss that my person dropped out and trumpets were blaring and angels came down and gave me a gift certificate. I can't say that that's what happened. It was a really simple switch, but it was like a switch went off inside me that just said, right, of course, if everything is God, even your ego, even your body, even your mental health is it. And so, in our spiritual quest, in our spiritual pursuits, we learn that things like trees or this rock, you know, is the energy of God appearing as a certain form in atoms and molecules. And the human mind was taught in English to label this rock. What is it? It's energy appearing as this, the energy of God. So if it can appear as a rock, it can appear as a mental health issue. So in a way, you could say there is no autism, there is no ADHD. Everything is just this. Everything is the creator, source, universal energy, God, what is. I mean, these are all just labels, and I'm very, very aware there's probably some non-dual word police people, thought police people on here that are saying, well, everything's a story. Even the word God's a story. Even the word energies. I'm very aware of this. I'm very aware of that all of these things are labels, and we actually really don't know what any of this is. I'm very aware. I mean, Jim Newman even calls this the unknown and stuff. So this is all the unknown. So in a way, when Jim Newman said, there is no ego, man. Everything is just this, something clicked. And that's when the true liberation actually occurred. I had had many blissful spiritual experiences in which I had visions of oneness and myself in oneness that came and went. But the true liberation, when that was internalized, when he said there's no ego, there's only God, was this body stopped trying to spiritually awaken. It stopped the entire spiritual pursuit of trying to quote unquote spiritually awaken because it was seen there's nothing was going to awaken. Everything was the energy of God, and God only awakens to itself. I mean, in the story of a person, you can say something awakens and there are things that happen and all, but in the end, it's just energy changing form from an unawakened being to an awakened being, but it's still the same God energy. And so when that was seen, something in here just calmed down and stopped trying to spiritually awaken. And that was the freedom. Everything was accepted, even my mental health, even my emotional dysregulation. And it's not to say that I don't, you know, take care of my mental health, that I don't take care of my emotions, that I don't do these things, but to go farther and to say, I got to get to a point where I'm worthy and God sees me as worthy of spiritual awakening, that all ended. That all stopped.